As Indians can be great actors, terrific performers, and perhaps that's why we were able to make such great cinema in the past, some great music too. Today's video is about this emotional burnout that every single Indian has to go through at some point in their lives and pretend that they are fine. We see this in the student who's collapsing under academic pressure but still puts on a smile on his face to hide his fears. We see it in the father who's been so busy fulfilling his responsibilities that he hasn't relaxed in the past 30 years. We see it in the mother who suffers alone all by herself because she was taught that enduring suffering is a sign of strength. You see it in the struggling, ambitious young man who has just realized that nobody's coming to save him. You see it in the brilliant young woman who had a bright career ahead of her that she sacrificed for her family. This is how people become numb just to survive. And none of this happened overnight, by the way. A society doesn't just simply become emotionally unavailable by accident. It happens after generations of instability, subjugation, humiliation, and scarcity. And over time, hope itself starts to die out. Slowly, people stop believing in each other. They don't ask for help. They stop offering it even. This is how an entire population stops believing in itself and starts to wait for an avatar or a messiah who will descend from the sky and set us up for greatness that we were all promised. It could be a leader, a godman, a billionaire, a revolution, anyone, anything. Somewhere along the way, we stopped having each other's back. And the people who do not care about each other, how can you expect them to save each other? When we talk about Indian history, we talk about empires, kings, invasions, battles, economic growth, social instability, but almost nobody talks about what this kind of a history does to an average individual. Because history ain't something that's just written in textbooks. In fact, history becomes a part of our DNA that gets passed down from one generation to the next. You might want to look into generational trauma. And India's history in many ways is about survival. For centuries, this land saw waves of invasions, exploitation, hierarchy, famine, instability, colonization, social fragmentation, you name it. We've seen it all. Most people during these times had very little control over their lives. Your survival here depended on obedience. Obedience to rulers, to systems, to caste, to society. And when a population lives like that for too long, it stops believing in itself. It becomes subservient. It becomes submissive. That is the adaptation that gets passed down through generations. You see it in the fear of standing out, in the obsession with what will people say. You see it in the pressure to choose security over meaning. You see it in the emotional tolerance for suffering. You see it in the normalization of stress, of sacrifice, of silence. You see, when generations grow up in unstable environments, emotional expression becomes dangerous. Individuality becomes risky. Hope becomes fragile. And just like that, survival itself becomes the highest virtue. That is why so many Indians are taught to endure instead of heal. And somewhere along the way, pain that was supposed to be seen as a problem to be solved now became a virtue. A rite of passage. That's what modern India has become. It also explains why people can witness suffering around them and still keep moving. Why emotional exhaustion, emotional burnout is seen as a sign of maturity. Why loneliness exists even inside supposedly loving families. There's a reason why people feel socially abandoned despite living in crowded spaces. I genuinely believe that exhausted societies cannot produce emotionally available people. They produce survivors, and survivors often do not have the luxury to save others. This is one of the reasons why I feel that India's biggest problem isn't its poverty. It's this burnout, this emotional fatigue, the kind of inherited trauma that gets passed on from one generation to the next so sneakily that nobody even notices it. Parents pass their fears to their children and call it wisdom. Children inherit anxiety from their parents and then call it survivorship or something. Society keeps moving forward on the surface, but when you look deeper, it's coming apart at the seams. I know for a fact that most people who participate in the system are not evil. They're simply afraid. Afraid of falling behind, afraid of instability, and afraid of shame. They're afraid of becoming invisible in a country of 1.47 billion people. So what do we do in a situation like that? We harden ourselves, we become callous, and slowly people start to see this callousness as a strength. There's a psychological phenomena called learned helplessness. When a person suffers long enough without control, they eventually stop trying to escape, even when escape becomes possible. Sometimes they see another person suffer, and when nobody comes forward to help them, they learn their biggest lie, that we are all helpless, helpless to help ourselves and helpless to help others. And sometimes I wonder if our entire country has developed this condition. If you look closely, you notice that people complain constantly but rarely believe that change is truly possible. They themselves make excuses for the state. A student is crushed by an education system that discourages creativity. Workers are burnt out before they even reach middle age. Families carry heavy trauma they will never ever talk about honestly. Here, corruption becomes normal, emotional neglect becomes normal, exhaustion becomes normal, and burnout becomes normal. And yet, most people continue enduring it with a kind of defeated acceptance. Because generations before them were taught that survival matters much more than change. Think about the average Indian child growing up. From the very beginning, we are trained to obey. Study this, memorize that, don't question elders, don't question authority, don't embarrass the family, don't take risks, and above all, do not ever fail. Here, even dreams are filtered through fear. Choose a safe career, be realistic. Stability matters more than passion. And slowly, without even realizing it, people start to shrink themselves. This is what inherited fear looks like, and with time, this inherited fear turns into this learned helplessness. People stop believing their lives belong to them, and then they begin to live reactively, not consciously, not mindfully. That's why so many Indians live in this permanent sense of emotional postponement. I'll relax once my exams are over. I'll be happy once I get married, once I have kids. Some even say that I'll be happy after my retirement. Can you believe that? Life itself here becomes a waiting room, and in that waiting room, emotional needs die out. People gradually become disconnected from themselves. A father sacrifices his whole life for his family but never learns how to express his love towards them. A mother carries a silent suffering for decades because she was taught endurance was virtue. Children inherit stress before they even understand what it means. And then we wonder why anxiety, loneliness, depression, and emotional numbness feel so widespread now, despite living in such a socially crowded society. Here we understand that proximity is not connection. Many Indian families live together but are emotionally far apart. Nobody talks honestly, nobody expresses openly, everybody performs an act of strength, as if this were a movie. This is how toxicity becomes culture, burnout becomes ambition, and emotional suppression becomes maturity. We have a problem of romanticizing suffering. Oh, this suffering made me stronger. But not all suffering creates wisdom. Sometimes suffering creates more suffering. Sometimes broken people unintentionally raise more broken people. And this cycle continues so much so that people mistake their inherited trauma for tradition and culture. We are all carrying heavy emotional weights at the expense of our sanity. One of the most fascinating things about India is how much we believe in this idea of a savior. Somebody who descends straight from the sky and saves us all. In India, hope is often outsourced. And maybe that makes sense when you understand the kind of history we come from. Because when people believe that they are powerless, they don't see themselves as agents of change. They begin to wait for a rescue instead. And this slowly poisons everything. A political figure suddenly becomes a demigod. Religion becomes emotional dependence instead of spiritual growth. Parents see their children as retirement plans. Children see their success as a way to avoid humiliation. In fact, young people dream of leaving this country these days. Everybody in this country is waiting for that one miraculous event that will change all of our lives. But here's the thing, messiahs rarely come. In fact, I believe that the idea of a messiah is very dangerous because they remove responsibility. If somebody else is going to save us, we don't have to do jack shit. We don't have to confront how fractured our society is, how divided our society is. And this is where we get into strange contradictions. People want to protest, but they also want comfort. They don't want any disruption. Do you think such mild, weak-ass protests achieve anything? We criticize corruption all the time, but we also indulge in it. A bribe over here, a donation over there to set things straight. We crave honesty. We want everybody else to be honest with us, but we ourselves will not be honest to anyone. We want all the freedom in the world, but we also want to do a bit of moral policing. Here you can see that dependence is seen as safer than agency. Agency is terrifying. Agency means accepting that no one is coming. No leader is going to heal your childhood. No politician is going to give your life meaning. No society is suddenly going to be righteous overnight. When I think deep down, every Indian knows this. That's why there's so much of chaos beneath the surface level optimism. The endless waiting eventually drains the human spirit. We see people scrolling motivational videos instead of changing their lives. Families endlessly discussing problems they will never confront honestly. We see citizens treating elections like salvation events, like the coming of Kalki Avatar or something. Young people worshipping hyper-successful people with ridiculous wealth without even knowing where that wealth came from. It is the psychology of people searching for permission to feel powerful again. But real change is much less dramatic than that. It's painfully ordinary. A parent apologizing to their child, a person refusing emotional abuse, someone choosing honesty over an act, friends actually showing up when you need them, and finally, people starting to think for themselves rather than becoming a part of a hive mind. Now, all of these actions are difficult because they need emotional maturity, and emotional maturity cannot be outsourced. The longer a society waits for heroes, the less its faith becomes in its own people. And maybe that's why so many people feel abandoned today. Everybody kept waiting for somebody to come in and solve their problems, instead of solving it themselves. India is a country that's built on powerful myths, powerful psychological myths, stories that we repeat all the time. We are family oriented, we respect elders, we believe in community, we are spiritually rich, we value relationships over individualism. And on the surface, many of these things may be true. Indian families often stay physically close. Festivals do feel vibrant. People gather with their loved ones to celebrate something or the other all the time. Relatives remain deeply involved in each other's lives. But sometimes I wonder how much of this is genuine emotional connection and how much of it is just a social structure. If India is so emotionally connected, why do so many people feel so profoundly alone? Why are so many children terrified of disappointing their parents? Why do so many adults hide their depression from their own families? Why is vulnerability treated like a weakness? Why do people feel uncomfortable talking about being honest or about failure, about confusion, loneliness, even pain? The myth says India has strong family values. But the reality to a lot of Indians is that it's just a performance, an act. Families may stay together physically on the surface, but when you scratch the surface a little, you understand the trauma, you understand the loneliness everybody goes through. People know each other's routines, but they do not know what's in their hearts. A son can live with his parents for 30 years straight, fulfilling every single responsibility without ever discussing his mental health, despite going through depression. A daughter can spend her entire life sacrificing for her family without getting anything in return. Parents can deeply love their children but can also emotionally wound them. Why? Because generational trauma gets passed down from one generation to the next. When suffering is normalized culturally, people don't even recognize emotional neglect when it happens. They just call it life. That is the terrifying power of collective myths. They make dysfunction look normal. Even the very idea of respect becomes corrupted. Many Indians are taught respect through fear, silence, hierarchy, obedience. Here, questioning itself becomes disrespect. Personal boundaries become selfishness. Emotional honesty becomes rebellion. So, as a result, people start to act instead of being their authentic selves. And then we get this weird situation where everybody's sacrificing, but nobody knows why. Even the very idea of community becomes an illusion. Because real community is not just proximity, it is presence. A real community notices suffering. It protects vulnerable people. It allows honesty without causing humiliation. But in many parts of modern life, people are too overwhelmed themselves to help others. So loneliness exists quietly beneath crowded houses, busy streets, weddings, festivals, WhatsApp groups, and family gatherings. And the saddest part in all of this is most people genuinely believe that they love each other. But love without emotional understanding can unintentionally become control. Protection can become pressure. Guidance can become fear. And sacrifice can feel like resentment. Here we need to ask ourselves, if we continue repeating these comforting myths, will anything ever become normal? Maybe the saddest part of modern India is not that people are suffering. Suffering is everywhere, it's pretty ubiquitous if you ask me. But I believe the real tragedy here is how normalized suffering has become. We have become so adapted to this burnout that we never even mention it. A child breaking under pressure is normal. A man silently losing himself to responsibility is normal. A woman carrying her so-called duties for decades is normal. Loneliness inside families is normal. Burnout is normal. Hopelessness is normal. And when suffering becomes normalized, people stop asking if life will ever get better. They just survive. But maybe that is where this entire conversation changes. Because the moment you realize nobody's coming to save you, you stop waiting for politicians to fix your problems. You stop waiting for your family to suddenly understand you. You stop waiting for success to magically heal your emotional emptiness. You stop waiting for the perfect future where your desired life finally begins. And for the first time, you're forced to confront reality. Not with cynicism like usual, but with responsibility. Because maybe healing a society doesn't begin with massive revolutions. Maybe it begins with something much smaller, much harder to accomplish. Something like people learning how to support each other. Parents refusing to pass their trauma on to their children. Friends showing up when you need them. People choosing honesty for real, not just as an act. Human beings finally admitting that they are exhausted instead of pretending to be strong all the time. Maybe the real change begins when our survival stops being our only identity. And maybe that is the deeper meaning behind the title of this video. Dear Indians, nobody's coming to save us. This was not supposed to be pessimistic. It is supposed to give you hope. It is meant to be liberating. Because if nobody's coming, then perhaps the responsibility of building trust, showing empathy, displaying courage and honesty belongs to us. So what do you think? I love to read your comments, so don't forget to drop one. Also, maybe like this video. And if you're feeling generous today, you can subscribe to my channel and make my day.